There's a Midwest city that was projected to face a $200 million annual deficit in 2022, where the mayor's chief of staff publicly said they were looking at a possible Detroit-style bankruptcy, where the 2026 budget starting gap reached $100 million, the largest since 2005, and where the pension obligations continue to compound faster than the revenue that funds them. The city is Milwaukee, and it's not even the worst on this list. Across America's Midwest, the fiscal story of 2026 has been quieter and stranger than the headlines suggest. Not the coastal cities with wildfires or downtown vacancy. The Midwest cities where the industrial base eroded decades ago, the population loss compounded quietly, and the pension obligations kept growing while the tax base shrank. According to the EY Parthenon 2023 restructuring analysis, a peer group of 12 U.S. cities with budgets over $1 billion and populations between 300,000 and 900,000 has been documented as the most fiscally stressed of any regional category in America. According to Truth in Accounting's Financial State of the Cities 2026 report, several Midwest cities have accumulated fiscal gaps that dwarf their annual budgets. According to Advisor Perspective's May 2026 analysis, dozens of metro areas will undergo significant public employee layoffs, service reductions, and pension restructurings within 2 years. According to the National League of Cities 2026 fiscal report, Midwest cities have absorbed the sharpest revenue-to-obligation gap of any regional category in America over the past 5 years. And underneath those numbers, the daily reality is not subtle. Libraries closing, police staffing dropping, streets deteriorating, pension bills growing, reserves depleting. In this countdown, we're exposing 10 Midwest cities quietly going bankrupt in 2026 while nobody is watching. Not the cliché version where Detroit is the only story. The real one. The version where fiscal watchdog reports, credit rating agency downgrades, and audited balance sheets show sustained deterioration in cities the national media rarely covers. One city on this list came within months of a Detroit-style bankruptcy filing in 2023. Another has watched its population decline by over 60% since 1950. A third has been operating under sustained pension pressure that consumes more than 30% of the general fund. A fourth had a water crisis that exposed decades of infrastructure decay. A fifth watched its industrial base contract by 90% in 60 years. Subscribe before your city's next fiscal audit lands. Like the video if you live in a Midwest city and have watched services thin without a press conference. Let's break it down. Number 10. Dayton, Ohio. The Gem City, where population has declined from over 262,000 in 1960 to roughly 137,000 in 2025, and the fiscal architecture built for the larger city has never been adjusted. There's a city where population has declined by nearly 48% since 1960, where the manufacturing base that anchored the local economy has continued to erode, where pension obligations from the historical workforce have compounded against a shrinking revenue base, and where the credit rating agencies have flagged sustained deterioration. Welcome to Dayton. The numbers. Dayton population declined from 262,000 in 1960 to approximately 137,000 in 2025, a loss of 48%. Dayton manufacturing employment has continued to erode as auto-adjacent sectors evolve toward electric vehicle production. Dayton municipal budget has been under sustained structural pressure for multiple decades. Dayton area home values have not kept pace with national appreciation trends. Dayton fiscal 2026 budget maintained core services only through significant workforce reductions. Dayton pension obligations continue to consume a growing share of general fund revenue. What it's like. Living in Dayton is like dating someone who was somebody in the 1960s and keeps quietly acknowledging the years since. Picture this. You're a 58-year-old lifelong Dayton resident in 2026. Your neighborhood has multiple vacant properties. Your local recreation center reduced weekend hours in 2024. Your neighbor at the sanitation department mentioned that pickup routes were consolidated. Your kids left for Columbus and Cincinnati more than a decade ago, where it gets uncomfortable. Dayton's structural problem is that the manufacturing decline began in the 1970s and the fiscal architecture never fully adjusted to the smaller economic base. The population declined, the tax base compressed. The pension obligations from the larger workforce did not decline proportionally. The services keep thinning to preserve the mandatory obligations. Sharp contrast. Dayton and Columbus are both Ohio cities. Columbus has grown its population substantially since 2000. Dayton has continued to lose it. Same state, opposite trajectories, and the divergence has widened every year. Number 9. Toledo, Ohio. The glass city where population declined by over 30% since 1970, and the fiscal pressure has compounded alongside the demographic contraction. There's a city where population declined from over 383,000 in 1970 to roughly 263,000 in 2025, where the glass and auto industries that anchored the local economy contracted substantially, where pension obligations continue to consume a growing share of general fund revenue, and where the sustained fiscal deterioration has been documented across multiple audit cycles. Welcome to Toledo. The numbers. Toledo population declined from 383,000 in 1970 to approximately 263,000 in 2025. Toledo manufacturing and glass industry employment has contracted substantially over 5 decades. Toledo municipal budget has been under sustained structural pressure for multiple decades. Toledo area home values rank among the lowest of any major U.S. metro. Toledo fiscal 2026 budget required substantial service reductions to close the projected gap. Toledo pension debt per capita has climbed alongside the demographic contraction. What it's like. Living in Toledo is like dating someone with real Midwest values whose employer keeps quietly announcing another restructuring. Picture this. You're a 51-year-old Toledo resident in 2026. Your neighborhood has multiple vacant properties. Your local library reduced hours in 2024 and 2025. Your neighbor at the water department mentioned that infrastructure maintenance is being deferred. Your friend who worked at the auto plant accepted an early retirement package, where it gets uncomfortable. Toledo's structural problem is that the manufacturing decline has been documented for 50 years without a durable reversal. The industrial base contracted. The population declined. The tax base compressed. The fiscal architecture has continued to depend on future taxpayers absorbing obligations from earlier decades. Sharp contrast. Toledo and Fort Wayne are similar-sized Midwest cities. Fort Wayne has stabilized its economic base and population. Toledo has continued to contract. Same region, very different post-industrial trajectories. Number 8. Flint, Michigan. The vehicle city where population declined by over 55% since 1960, and the fiscal deterioration compounded on top of the water crisis of 2014 that never fully resolved. There's a city where population has declined from nearly 197,000 in 1960 to roughly 78,000 in 2025, where the Flint water crisis of 2014 exposed infrastructure that had been decaying for decades, where fiscal pressure has produced sustained service reductions, and where the recovery narratives have not produced durable results. Welcome to Flint. The numbers. Flint population declined from 197,000 in 1960 to approximately 78,000 in 2025, a loss of over 60%. Flint water crisis of 2014 exposed decades of infrastructure underinvestment. Flint has been under emergency management status multiple times since 2011. Flint municipal budget has been under sustained structural pressure alongside the demographic decline. Flint infrastructure investment continues to depend on state and federal support. What it's like. Living in Flint is like dating someone who genuinely tried to recover and keeps discovering new problems from the previous decade. Picture this. You're a 62-year-old lifelong Flint resident in 2026. Your neighborhood has multiple vacant properties. Your water utility bill arrived with a rate increase. Your neighbor at the police department mentioned that response times have been extended. Your kids left for Detroit and Grand Rapids in the 2000s. Where it gets uncomfortable. Flint's structural problem is that the population loss and infrastructure decay compounded over 60 years, and the 2014 water crisis exposed the compounding without producing sustained recovery. The population declined. The infrastructure decayed. The state emergency management periods produced short-term stabilization. The structural conditions that produced the crisis remain in place. Sharp contrast. Flint and Grand Rapids are both Michigan cities. Grand Rapids has grown its economic base and population since 2010. Flint has continued to lose both. Same state, very different post-2000 outcomes. Hey, before we get into the top 7, the cities we're about to cover are the ones where the fiscal deterioration has been documented in Truth in Accounting's Financial State of the Cities 2026 report, in EY Parthenon restructuring analysis, and in credit rating agency reports. If this list has been useful, hit subscribe because the next one is 10 American cities where the property tax bill just doubled, and you'll want to see if your city is on the list. Like the video if you live in a Midwest city and have watched services thin without a press conference. Drop a comment if your city just cut a service, raised a fee, or announced a hiring freeze. Now let's keep going. Number 7. Rockford, Illinois. The Forest, city where population decline, manufacturing contraction, and fiscal pressure have compounded for 4 decades, and the political conversation has not produced durable recovery. There's a city where population has declined from over 147,000 in 2000 to roughly 145,000 in 2025 after peaking, where the manufacturing base has contracted substantially, where property values remain among the lowest of any Illinois metro, and where the fiscal architecture has been under sustained pressure alongside the state-level pension crisis. Welcome to Rockford, the numbers. Rockford population has stagnated at approximately 145,000 in 2025 after decades of contraction. Rockford manufacturing employment has contracted substantially over 4 decades. Rockford area home values rank among the lowest of any Illinois metro. Rockford municipal budget has been under sustained structural pressure from Illinois state-level fiscal challenges. Rockford was named one of Zillow's hottest 2025 markets on affordability grounds, but the affordability reflects sustained value stagnation. Rockford outmigration among working-age residents has continued at sustained rates. What it's like. Living in Rockford is like dating someone reliable and interesting whose entire family lives 3 states away now. Picture this. You're a 55-year-old Rockford resident in 2026. Your home value is roughly flat. Your property tax bill climbed alongside Illinois state-level pension pressure. Your neighbor at the school district mentioned that program cuts are under discussion. Your kids left for Chicago and Indianapolis. Where it gets uncomfortable. Rockford's structural problem is that the Illinois state-level pension crisis compounds on top of the local fiscal challenges in a way most Midwest cities do not experience. The state pension pressure pushes property tax higher. The property tax pushes residents out. The tax base compresses, the service capacity narrows. Sharp contrast. Rockford and Madison are both Rust Belt adjacent cities. Madison has grown its economic base substantially since 2000. Rockford has continued to contract. Same region, opposite trajectories. Number 6. Gary, Indiana, the Steel City, where population has declined by over 60% since 1960, and the fiscal deterioration has been documented for over 40 years without a durable reversal. There's a city where population declined from 178,000 in 1960 to roughly 68,000 in 2025, where the steel industry that anchored the local economy has contracted almost entirely, where the vacant property inventory reached tens of thousands of units, and where the fiscal architecture depends on state assistance to maintain even minimal services. Welcome to Gary, the numbers. Gary population declined from 178,000 in 1960 to approximately 68,000 in 2025, a loss of over 60%. Gary steel industry employment declined by roughly 90% between 1960 and 2020. Gary vacant property inventory reached tens of thousands of units. Gary municipal budget has been under emergency management or equivalent state assistance for multiple periods. Gary area home values remain among the lowest of any U.S. city over 50,000 population. Reddit quote, Gary is the city that lost 60% of its population, 90% of its industry, and the news coverage keeps calling it a comeback story. What it's like. Living in Gary is like dating someone who was famous in 1955 and refuses to acknowledge the decades have passed. Picture this. You're a 68-year-old lifelong Gary resident in 2026. Your neighborhood has more vacant properties than occupied ones. Your local library reduced hours in 2024. Your neighbor at the sanitation department mentioned that pickup routes were merged again. Your kids left for Chicago in the 1990s, where it gets uncomfortable. Gary's structural problem is that the industrial collapse of the 1970s and 1980s produced a population decline that has never durably reversed. The steel industry contracted. The population left. The tax base compris. Said, the vacant properties multiplied. The service capacity narrowed to below minimum viability without state support. Sharp contrast. Gary and Fort Wayne are both Indiana cities. Fort Wayne has stabilized economically. Gary has continued to contract. Same state, very different post-industrial outcomes. Number 5, Kansas City, Missouri, the Paris of the Plains, where the fiscal pressure has been documented alongside sustained population loss in specific neighborhoods, and the reserves have been depleted to fund ongoing expenses. There's a city where the general fund has been under sustained structural pressure, where the historical tax base concentrated in downtown has compressed as commercial real estate valuations reset, where pension obligations continue to grow, and where the fiscal architecture depends on future revenue growth that has not materialized at projected rates. Welcome to Kansas City. The numbers. Kansas City municipal budget has been under sustained structural pressure for multiple years. Kansas City downtown commercial real estate valuations have reset lower alongside national trends. Kansas City pension obligations continue to grow relative to general fund revenue. Kansas City area home values in specific neighborhoods have not kept pace with national appreciation trends. Kansas City fiscal 2026 budget maintained core services through reserve depletion rather than new revenue. What it's like. Living in Kansas City is like dating someone who keeps insisting the neighborhood is transitioning while the transition takes longer every year. Picture this. You're a 46-year-old Kansas City resident in 2026. Your neighborhood has multiple vacant commercial properties. Your library branch reduced hours in 2024. Your neighbor at the fire department mentioned that station response times have been extended. Your friend who worked in downtown accepted a remote role. Ian left the city, where it gets uncomfortable. Kansas City's structural problem is that the downtown commercial real estate reset compounds on top of pre-existing fiscal pressure from pension obligations. The commercial values dropped. The property tax revenue compressed. The pension obligations continued to grow. The reserves have been depleted to bridge the gap. Sharp contrast. Kansas City and Nashville are both Middle America cities. Nashville has grown its downtown tax base substantially since 2015. Kansas City has watched its downtown tax base compress. Same country, very different downtown trajectories. Number 4, Cincinnati, Ohio, the Queen City where the fiscal pressure has been documented in the EY Parthenon peer group analysis, and the structural gap between revenue and obligations continues to widen. There's a city that appears in the EY Parthenon peer group of 12 fiscally stressed U.S. cities with budgets over $1 billion, where population has stabilized but not grown at rates that would ease fiscal pressure, where pension obligations continue to compound, and where the fiscal architecture depends on state-shared revenue that has not kept pace. Welcome to Cincinnati. The numbers. Cincinnati appears in the EY Parthenon peer group of 12 fiscally stressed U.S. cities. Cincinnati population has stabilized at approximately 309,000 in 2025 after decades of decline. Cincinnati municipal budget has been under sustained structural pressure from pension obligations. Cincinnati area home values have grown modestly relative to national trends. Cincinnati fiscal 2026 budget required workforce restraint and program review to close the projected gap. Cincinnati downtown commercial real estate has softened alongside national office trends. What it's like. Living in Cincinnati is like dating someone with genuine charm whose lifestyle costs slightly more than they can sustainably afford. Picture this. You're a 49-year-old Cincinnati resident in 2026. Your property tax bill climbed alongside the reassessment cycle. Your neighbor at the school district mentioned that program cuts are under discussion. Your local library reduced hours in specific branches. Your friend at a city agency accepted an early retirement package, where it gets uncomfortable. Cincinnati's structural problem is that pension obligations grew faster than the tax base for multiple decades, and the compounding gap has never been fully closed. The pension bills keep arriving. The revenue growth has moderated. The state-shared revenue has not kept pace with obligation growth. The service capacity narrows to preserve mandatory payments. Sharp contrast. Cincinnati and Columbus are both Ohio cities. Columbus has grown its population and tax base substantially since 2000. Cincinnati has stabilized but not grown at comparable rates. Same state, very different demographic outcomes. Number 3, St. Louis, Missouri. The gateway city where the population loss reached over 67% since 1950, the largest documented urban decline in modern American history, and the fiscal architecture has compressed alongside the demographic contraction. There's a city where population declined from approximately 856,000 in 1950 to roughly 280,000 in 2025, where the vacant property inventory reached tens of thousands of units, where the tax base has compressed alongside the population, and where the fiscal pressure has produced sustained service reductions across multiple decades. Welcome to St. Louis. The numbers. St. Louis population declined from 856,000 in 1950 to approximately 280,000 in 2025, a loss of over 67% in 75 years. St. Louis vacant property inventory reached tens of thousands of units concentrated in specific neighborhoods. St. Louis municipal budget has been under sustained structural pressure for multiple decades. St. Louis area homicide rate has been substantially above national averages for years. St. Louis appears in the EY Parthenon peer group of 12 fiscally stressed U.S. cities. What it's like. Living in St. Louis is like dating someone with real history and real charm whose extended family keeps quietly leaving the state. Picture this. You're a 55-year-old lifelong St. Louis resident in 2026. Your neighborhood has 6 vacant properties within a 2-block radius. Your library branch reduced hours twice in 2024 and 2025. Your neighbor at the police department mentioned that response times have been extended. Your kid's school district faces sustained budget pressure, where it gets uncomfortable. St. Louis's structural problem is that the population loss has been the most extensively documented in modern American urban history, and the reversal has not materialized despite multiple recovery narratives. The population declined 67%. The tax base compressed proportionally. The service capacity has narrowed across multiple categories. The fiscal architecture depends on continued state and federal support. Sharp contrast. St. Louis and Kansas City are both Missouri cities. Kansas City has stabilized its population. St. Louis has continued to lose it. Same state, opposite trajectories. Number 2, Cleveland, Ohio. The forest city where population has declined by over 60% since 1950, and the Cuyahoga County reassessment shock added an acute property tax dimension to a chronic demographic problem. There's a city where population declined from approximately 914,000 in 1950 to roughly 360,000 in 2025, where Cuyahoga County reassessments produced double-digit property tax increases for many homeowners in 2024, where compounding effect has accelerated outmigration, and where the fiscal pressure has been documented in credit rating agency analyses. Welcome to Cleveland. The numbers. Cleveland population declined from 914,000 in 1950 to approximately 360,000 in 2025. Cleveland-Cuyahoga County reassessments in 2024 produced double-digit property tax increases for substantial numbers of homeowners. Cleveland property tax appeals filings spiked over 40% in 2025 as homeowners responded to the reassessment shock. Cleveland area home values have not kept pace with national appreciation trends. Cleveland appears in the EY Parthenon peer group of 12 fiscally stressed U.S. cities. Reddit quote, Cleveland is the city that lost 60% of its population, then reassessed the remaining homeowners at rates none of them could plan for. What it's like. Living in Cleveland is like dating someone who's been quietly running up a tab while telling you the relationship is affordable. Picture this. You're a 71-year-old retired Cleveland resident in 2026. You bought your home in 1988 for $98,000. Your property tax bill in 2025 after the Cuyahoga reassessment was $3,600. Your retirement income did not climb 28% to match. You attended the township meeting in March about the appeal process. Where it gets uncomfortable. Cleveland's structural problem is that the population loss and the reassessment shock compounded simultaneously. The demographic decline was already substantial. The property tax reassessment concentrated additional pain on residents who remained. The migration outflow has accelerated among working-age residents. The fiscal pressure continues to grow alongside the population contraction. Sharp contrast. Cleveland and Columbus are both Ohio cities. Columbus has grown its population substantially since 2000. Cleveland has continued to lose it. Same state, opposite trajectories. Number 1. Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The cream city that came within months of a Detroit-style bankruptcy filing in 2022, where the 2026 budget starting gap reached $100 million, the largest since 2005, and where the pension obligations continue to consume a growing share of general fund revenue. There's a city that was projected to face a $200 million annual deficit in 2022, where the mayor's chief of staff publicly said they were looking at a possible Detroit-style bankruptcy, where the 2023 state legislation authorized a 2% city sales tax and shared revenue increase to stabilize the fiscal position, where the 2026 budget starting gap still reached $100 million, and where the pension obligations continue to grow faster than the revenue that funds them. Welcome to Milwaukee. The numbers. Milwaukee 2022 fiscal analysis projected a $200 million annual deficit and possible Detroit-style bankruptcy. Milwaukee 2023. Wisconsin Act 12 authorized a 2% city sales tax and shared revenue increase, producing an estimated $180 million annually. Milwaukee 2026 budget starting gap reached $100 million, the largest since 2005. Milwaukee pension obligations continue to consume a growing share of general fund revenue. Milwaukee population declined from 741,000 in 1960 to approximately 561,000 in 2025. Milwaukee appears in the EY Parthenon peer group of 12 fiscally stressed U.S. cities. What it's like. Living in Milwaukee is like dating someone who almost died last year and keeps quietly acknowledging the diagnosis has not fully resolved. Picture this. You're a 52-year-old lifelong Milwaukee resident in 2026. Your city sales tax went up in 2023. Your property tax bill climbed in 2024 and 2025. Your library branch reduced hours in 2024. Your neighbor at the fire department mentioned that staffing has been stabilized, but pension pressure continues. Where it gets uncomfortable. Milwaukee's structural problem is that the 2023 rescue measures stabilized the immediate crisis, but did not restructure the underlying pension architecture. The 2022 near bankruptcy was averted. The 2023 rescue produced $180 million annually. The 2026 starting gap still reached $100 million. The pension obligations continue to grow. The rescue measures produced short-term stabilization without long-term structural resolution. Sharp contrast. Milwaukee and Madison are both Wisconsin cities. Dayton has grown its economic base and tax revenue substantially since 2015. Milwaukee has stabilized after near bankruptcy, but continues to face structural pension pressure. Same state, very different fiscal starting positions, so there it is. Midwest cities quietly going bankrupt in 2026, while nobody is watching, on the public record, in Truth in Accounting's Financial State of the Cities 2026 report, in EY Parthenon Restructuring Analysis, in Advisor Perspectives Municipal Default Projections, and in the daily lives of residents watching services thin-dodged cities where population loss has compounded for decades, cities where the industrial base contracted and the fiscal architecture never fully adjusted, cities where pension obligations continue to grow faster than the revenue that funds them, cities where reassessment shocks have concentrated pain on residents who remained, cities where the rescue measures produced short-term stabilization without long-term structural resolution. The American Midwest cities with stable fiscal positions in 2026 share specific characteristics. They have grown their economic base since 2000. They have moderated pension obligations. They have diversified tax bases, and they have not experienced the industrial contraction that hollowed out peer cities. The 10 cities on this list have varying combinations of the opposite conditions. Some are quietly stabilizing after near bankruptcy. Others are approaching the same fiscal cliff Milwaukee approached in 2022. The gaps grew. The reserves shrunk. The services thinned. The bill got passed to future taxpayers who did not vote on the obligations. If this list helped, share it with the friend who lives in a Midwest city and keeps insisting the budget is fine. Hit subscribe because next we're breaking down 10 American cities where the property tax bill just doubled. Drop a comment if your Midwest city just cut a service or raised a fee. And remember, the worst municipal crisis isn't the loud one with the bankruptcy filing. It's the quiet one, where the mayor announces the budget is balanced and the library on your block reduces its hours next month.